way I always heard it, because you look in the history books and they got all these different theories and this and that. No, it was this. But the story that I heard more than once was
James Hughes Callahan, a soldier of the Texas Revolution and frontier military leader, he marched to Texas as a sergeant in Captain J.C. Wynn's 3rd Company of the Georgia Battalion, which arrived at Velasco just before Christmas of 1835. Callahan served in this unit for more than the next 2 months, but managed to escape the Goliad Massacre, probably by having been engaged in a labor detail at Victoria during the battles of March 1836. After a post-war visit in the United States, he settled in the southwestern hill country. He helped establish Walnut Springs, now Seguin, in 1838. During the 1840s, he moved to Caldwell County, where he operated a 350-acre farm and a store. He also held government land grants in Lavaca and Kimball counties. He married Sarah Melissa Day in 1841, and they had 4 children. Callahan remained an active citizen and soldier, and like many others who had fought in the Revolution, was vigorously anti-Mexican. From 1839 to 1841, he commanded a group of Minutemen in Guadalupe County who chased and fought Indians and Mexicans accused of stealing horses. He also volunteered for more formal campaigns between 1840 and 1842. He served as a first lieutenant in Matthew Caldwell's company in 1840, and became a company commander during the incursion of Rafael Vasquez in 1841, in which he led a retreat from San Antonio. The next year, his 60-man company helped expel Adrian Wall from Texas and saw action at the Battle of Salado Creek. Later that year, Callahan also served as a lieutenant in the Somerville Expedition. His military activities then ceased until 1855, when he commanded the punitive expedition into Mexico that bears his name. The campaign originated with Governor E. M. Pease's authorization to form a ranger company to retaliate against Indian attacks in Bexar and Comal counties. Callahan was also responding to slaveholders' appeals for a military venture that would return runaway slaves from Mexico. Accordingly, his company of about 130 men crossed the Rio Grande at Eagle Pass on September 29, 1855, and fought an inconclusive battle about 40 miles south of there on the Rio Escondido. Callahan retreated to Piedras Negras, which he first fortified, then looted and burned, before recrossing the Rio Grande under fire. He failed to gain the support needed for another expedition, but public opinion generally favored his aggressive action. He moved to Blanco in 1854 or early 1855, and was killed there in April 1856 during a feud with Woodson Blassingame. Upon approaching the Blassingames cabin, Callahan yelled into the cabin for Woodson to come out. Shooting commenced, and again, depending on the account, nobody knows who fired first. Most accounts say the Blassingames. However, one newspaper account suggests that Thomas Johnson, William Maulheel Johnson's son, a boy of about 17, may have spooked and fired either intentionally or by accident, but the shooting was on. Callahan was killed instantly. William fell next. Thomas reportedly emptied his weapon and then fled the scene. John M. Watson, then along with Bob Page, went out to see about the Blassingames. The 2 killed men were still lying where they were shot, and the Blassingames were still in their cabin. Watson suggested to Woodson that since there was really no law in the area and that Callahan was a very popular man, that he might be better off going into Mexico. Woodson chose not to, and asked Watson for his assistance in getting a fair trial. Watson agreed. The Blassingames, Woodson, wife Mary, and son Calvin were taken into custody. On April 14, 1856, a mob of men, reportedly as large as 100 strong, approached the Lang cabin and demanded the Blassingames be turned over to them. The 2 Blassingame men were dragged out by their heels and told to run. They refused, claiming they had done nothing wrong, feeling they had acted in self-defense against Callahan. The 2 Blassingames were shot where they stood. One news account stated that Woodson had more than 50 bullet holes in him and that supposedly young Thomas Johnson had emptied his gun into the body, although he was never indicted for any part in the killings. The legislature of 1857-58 named Callahan County in his honor. In 1931, the bodies of Callahan and his wife were removed from the cemetery at Blanco and reinterred in the Texas State Cemetery, Austin. Fellow researchers Steve Rosignol and Eddie Lanham in Blanco County, Texas, as they locate the Blasingame log cabin where Callahan was killed, visit the grave of Callahan in Austin and search for the graves of his killers who were not allowed to be buried in the Blanco City Cemetery.
We're in Blanco County, Texas, and finally found the Blassingame cabin where Texas Ranger James Callahan was killed. And we're going to get up here a little bit closer to it. We're going to talk with Steve Rosignol, who is a member of the Blanco County Historical Commission. We're at the Blassingame cabin that was built probably when, Steve?
I would say it was probably built 1855 or
somewhere in there.
It was built by 1855.
Okay.
Because Callahan would have been shot here in 1855.
Okay, tell me a little bit about Callahan.
I guess Callahan was a Texas Ranger, famous and notorious, if you want to, for the raid on Eagle Pass back in earlier in 1855, where supposedly they were pursuing Kickapoo Indians that had made a raid, and now suddenly they got into it with the Mexican army in the town of Eagle Pass, or Piedras Negras, across the border. And on his retreat, he burned Piedras Negras to the ground, is what the story goes. There's always been the speculation that he was pursuing escaped African-American slaves on that thing, and that was the part of the legacy that seems to have followed him around. Now, some people have disputed that over the years, but there's pretty good evidence of that. Upon his return, one of the guys in his militia unit was Woodson Blassingame's son Calvin, I believe. And upon his return, Callahan learned that supposedly Woodson Blassingame, who lived in his cabin, was making disparaging remarks about him. And Callahan approached this cabin with Clem Hines and Maul Hill Johnson. and they were basically called out Blassingames to come out, and they were fired upon by the Blassingames, and Callahan was killed, Clem Hines was wounded, and Mulhill Johnson was killed. And
Now, he was originally buried here in, let me tell you where we are first. We're in Blanco, right outside of Blanco, Texas, on the west side.
this is the west side of town, about a couple miles from town of Blanco.
And he was first buried in the, what do you call it, city cemetery?
That would have been the Blanco Cemetery, which was his land at the time, too. He was the developer of the town of Pittsburgh of Blanco. He was into, I guess he would have been one of the early settlers and developers of the town, along with several other people. And he was buried on he was one of the first burials there in that cemetery. Him, and I think there's some earlier ones, but he was originally buried there and then moved to the Texas State Cemetery in Austin in 1936 during the Texas Centennial things there. And this is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is great.
This is the first time I've had the chance to actually be here myself.
Steve's with the Historical Commission in the county. And we're going several other places today. This was our first stop, which was, we really didn't think we could find it, but this nice gentleman right over here who was working on the site got us, he said, I know where it is. I'll take you there. So here we go. And so Steve's getting some pictures for the Historical Commission because they're trying to document all the historical structures that are left in the county. And I imagine this oak tree right here would have been right. I don't know how old it would have been. This is an old tree. It was probably here when Callahan was killed. But anyway, that's the story about well, it's part of the story. We'll tell you more later. And we drove up to the cemetery, Sour Cemetery, and this is where the Blassingames are buried that killed Callahan. It's a story behind this, believe me, and I think they're going to tell us a little bit about it in just a minute. But they were after they killed Callahan, the town people came after them. They arrested. They put them in jail. There was a group of people that came up and going to pull them out and hang them. And I'll let them tell you the rest of this story. But we're out here in rural Texas on a ranch.
Germans. I don't know if the Blassingames were Germans or not, but
no, but you know, you hear a lot of different stories. The story I was always told, and the one that makes most sense, is young Blassingame. Back in those days, everybody had the older ranchers married younger women, and young Blassingame got hired out to one of those ranchers. And that rancher, the way I always heard it, because you look in the history books and they got all these different theories and this and that. No, it was this. But the story that I heard more than once was that the rancher, that guy thought he was fooling around with his young wife.
I've heard that story too.
So who was?
I can't remember the names. He was.
Was it Calvin the son?
Calvin, yeah.
Well, one of the sons went with Callahan on the expedition, and then one of them stayed home, and he was the one that was supposedly fooling around with Callahan's wife.
Yeah.
So the story goes, or the rumors go at the time.
The rumors, that was always the rumor, but that made a lot of sense.
Now, did they hang these people?
Yeah. Well, no, they shot them.
They shot
them. They were going to hang them. They put them in the jail, which is still on the corner. It's now a title company, or it used to be. I don't know. They held them in the jail, and then they had gone and got a bunch of kinfolk from down around Bastrop or something, and then they come and busted them out of there. They were going to hang them like a vigilante deal, and they took off and they shot them.
Yeah,
the
there
back
were over
as
100
they're
of them.
running.
in
Wow.
that mob,
Yeah.
supposedly,
Yeah.
including a lot of the old Texas Rangers that Callahan had gone with.
Sour that was killed 1960. That used to be a gravel road out there, and Charlie was used to just pulling out on it and just going to town, not looking. He got hit by a bobtail truck, knocked him down in the river, and he was deader than stumped.
God almighty. This is wild. Okay, so these are the graves right here. You can see
Yeah, I
the.
guess, like you're saying, sir,
What's-
that was a headstone and footstone, wasn't it? You're thinking?
Yeah, no, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Okay.